You're tuned to the Voice of Russia. I'm Hywel Davies, and today's debate is on David Cameron and his future as Tory leader after last week's Eastleigh by-election. It was only a by-election, but the voters of Eastleigh sent a strong message to the Conservative Party last week. A Liberal Democrat win was largely expected, despite accusations of sexual impropriety against the party's former chief executive. More surprising was the strong showing by UKIP, which beat the Conservatives into third place. A wave of criticism, much of it aimed at David Cameron, has followed in the right-wing press. So is his position really under threat, or is this discontent merely the usual midterm blues from the usual suspects? I'm joined now by Harry Phipps, a Conservative councillor in London and an editor on the Conservative Home website, David Coburn, London Regional Chairman for UKIP, and by Richard Morris, Lib Dem party member and a Lib Dem blogger for the New Statesman. If I might start with you, Harry, where do you think it went wrong with Eastleigh for the Conservatives?
I think that there's a strong message to David Cameron from traditional Conservative supporters that are disappointed that more hasn't been achieved in terms of reducing tax, reducing bureaucracy. They felt, well, we had this Labour government for all these years, spending all this money, all this debt, and they don't really feel a clear change in direction in terms of the economy. So I think that's the big issue, which the government need to go further on to reconnect with the strivers, the small businessmen, the self-employed, all the people who felt they were really clobbered by the Labour government and were waiting for this great liberation, which they haven't really sensed has come. But I think that in other respects, he's in quite a strong position. I think the important issue of the European Union and offering the in-out referendum at the next general election, I think will mean that people who wanted to send a message that they were unhappy with our membership of the European Union might find that quite effective in a by-election or the Euro elections to vote UKIP. But in a general election, if the Labour Party are saying that they won't offer the referendum and the Conservatives are saying they will offer it, then I think the UKIP vote could be squeezed because people who want the chance of a referendum realise that the most realistic prospect of that is by voting Conservative. So I think there could well be a recovery, and it could well be that at the general election the Conservatives manage to take the seat and to generally recover a lot of support from UKIP.
Isn't that the problem for UKIP, David, is that, come a general election, we've had our protest vote, people will go back to the main parties?
No, absolutely not. UKIP are taking votes from all the parties, Labour Party, Liberal Party and the Conservative Party. There are only two parties in this country. There's the Lib Lab Conservative Party, which are very much the same, run by people who've never had a real job in their lives, Clegg, Cameron and Miliband. And then there's the opposition, which is UKIP, and people are fed up to the back teeth of it. I mean, Cameron's not a real Conservative. He's been flapping about, talking about things like windmills and gay marriage and goodness knows all what. Well, what people want to know about is how is he going to get out of the economic crisis we're in. People are fed up with the European Union. It's a catastrophe. It's very dangerous. On the 1st of January, we're going to have any part from 1 to 29 million Bulgarians and Romanians coming over here. The health service can't cope with things as they are, far less with goodness knows how many people coming over from Eastern Europe. I don't blame the Romanians and Bulgarians. I'd be on my way too if I were them. But it's the national health service, not the global or the international health service, and we just can't have this. And I think that Cameron he's been the worst leader the Conservative Party have ever had. I mean, I think he's up there with the Michael Foot of the Conservative Party. I think is the only way I can describe him. But he's been great for UKIP. He's our best man.
Richard, the Lib Dems, they benefited from a split in the right-wing vote. They wouldn't have won otherwise.
I mean, I noticed you said in your introduction, Hywel, that sort of the Lib Dems were meant to hold on to the seat, were expected to hold on to the seat. But of course, that isn't actually the expectation at all. I mean, so the received wisdom in the media is we're sort of, facing Lib Dem annihilation. And here we are in a Lib Dem seat and we hold it. And yes, we did lose some share of the vote, but nothing like sort of the other parties. So from our point of view, it was obviously we won. It was kind of extremely positive. And I would say, so going forward, we kind of look like more the party of government. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, that the receiverism, again, is that the parties in government always get a kicking in a by-election. And here we are, winning and sort of, triumphing over everyone else. So, no, it was obviously a very good day for us.
What do you think, as the coalition partner, of the kicking that David Cameron has received in the Tory press since Eastleigh?
It's a bit like sort of trampling on friends' nightmares, really, isn't it, at the end of the day? I mean, you can understand why he's had the kicking that he has. They haven't kind of performed. As we all know, the Tory party has a taste for regicide. The leader ultimately kind of gets blamed for what's going on. And David Cameron does have an extremely difficult kind of trick to pull off. I mean, he didn't win the last general election, and the Tory party likes a winner. And in order to kind of win the next general election and to deliver a majority, he's actually got to increase the share of the Conservative vote. No Tory leaders managed that since 1955, sort of, from going from government and increasing their share of the vote in the next general election. So he has got an extremely difficult problem. And if the Tory party thinks he's not going to be able to do that, then they will undoubtedly take action. And you can see, therefore, that's kind of why all the talk in the media is what it is at the moment, and why the tales of plots are abounding at the moment.
I think it's complete nonsense to suggest that David Cameron's leadership's under threat. I think that the issue where Tory MPs have felt very, very strongly in the past against their leaders, such as John Major, was over the issue of the European Union. There's
Margaret Thatcher as well, of course.
And Margaret Thatcher as well on the other MPs on the other side of the argument. And there's greater unity in the Conservative Party on the issue of European Union than anybody can remember. There's because of the offer of the in-out referendum, which means that, and I'm surprised that David saying that he thinks David Cameron's worse than any other Tory, because he's obviously David Cameron's gone further in terms of the Eurosceptic direction than any former leader in terms of Margaret Thatcher, in terms of saying that there does now need to be a choice on whether or not we wish to continue as members of the European Union, and at the very least there needs to be strong renegotiation with a lot of powers coming back before it's even conceivable that people would wish to continue as members, and that whatever the outcome of that renegotiation, then that will be a choice. And I don't know of a single Tory MP who's objected to that policy. The ones who want to stay in the European Union say, well, fair enough, people should have a choice. And the ones who are in the middle saying, well, let's see what the renegotiation is like, think it's fair enough. And the ones that people like me who think, well, look, it's clear now that we should come out, also feel that offering the referendum is a satisfactory way of resolving it.
But Harry, he offered a referendum before, and he didn't give it to people. He'll find another reason not to have another referendum if he gets in again. Nobody believes him anymore, and that's the message from Eastleigh and from Corby and from Rotherham. People do not believe the Conservatives anymore. They don't believe Cameron's going to give them a referendum of any shape or form. And the City of London, if we don't do something about it, it's going to be in a very bad state of affairs. You only have to look at the European Union now trying to cap salaries. I mean, much as I don't approve of what happened with the bankers, quite frankly, you can't have that. It's catastrophic for us. Business will simply go off to the Far East of the United States. Cameron has been catastrophic. He's been utterly ludicrous. He's lost half the party. More than half the party have left the Conservative Party. That says an awful lot about it. If you lose half your members because, well, one, you don't care what they think. Basically, Conservative Party members are a life support system at the end of a string attached to a blue balloon. Nobody cares what they think. Nobody consults them. It used to be that each constituency would be able to choose its own candidate. That doesn't happen anymore. They put in all Cameron's little chums. Again, people like him who've never had a proper job in their life.
You're tuned to The Voice of Russia. I'm Hywel Davies, and today's debate is on David Cameron and his future as Tory leader after last week's Eastleigh by-election. I'm joined by Harry Phipps of the Conservative Home website, David Coburn, London Regional Chairman of UKIP, and by Richard Morris, a Lib Dem blogger for the New Statesman. Richard Morris, the Lib Dem party machinery in the countryside seems to be doing quite well, whereas the Conservatives perhaps allowed it to wither on the vine a little bit. Is that what your experience is?
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely the case in Eastleigh, where the machine in Eastleigh, I mean, Eastleigh is a Lib Dem stronghold. We own virtually every council seat that there is going. So there's a fantastic machine there. And this is the great strength of Lib Dems, where we have the incumbency factor, undoubtedly. And one of the things that kind of got forgotten last Thursday was obviously Eastleigh got all the attention and people were kind of saying, you'll never repeat that at a general election because of the thousands of party members who kind of went down. There was a local by-election as well on Thursday in southwest London, which was almost exactly the same circumstances. A Lib Dem held seat. The Lib Dem had actually died in that particular case. There was an incumbency factor, Lib Dem council, and they increased the majority again. So the Lib Dem held that seat and won it without those thousands of feet on the ground. So the Lib Dem incumbency factor is incredibly important for the party and works incredibly well. And it's very, very kind of clear that the Tories don't have that same machine in place, and that is going to be a huge problem for them.
So, Harry, is there a problem with the party machinery in the country? Has it been able to wither slightly? Is the leadership to blame for that?
Well, Eastleigh, certainly is an exception. I don't think there's any other constituency in the country with as many Lib Dem councillors, because the Lib Dems have had difficult couple of years in terms of losing a lot of councillors, and in Eastleigh it's exceptional that they've hung on strongly there. So I think that to some extent that should be their victory should be seen in that context before they take too much comfort from it in terms of the lessons to other things. Another point that was caution for the Lib Dems is that there was a exit poll from my boss at Conservative Home, Lord Ashcroft, but carried out, he wasn't asking the questions himself. It was done by, reputable independent polling company, and it was asking people if they would vote differently in a general election. And people who actually voted in the by-election, and that result indicated that the Conservatives would have gained the seat had there been a general election.
I don't think that's the case.
Well, that's the case. That was the case of the opinion. That was the case of the opinion poll, and it wasn't. And it was showing the Conservatives would have gained the seat by.
Everybody makes up these polls.
It's fantastic. The Conservatives can go on a poll and say the poll reflects the feelings of the people more than the election that actually happened 24 hours earlier, when people were actually in a booth and had to put crosses in boxes. They voted Lib Dem and they voted UKIP.
Can I just come to Dave for a second? Okay, so if you want to have a Eurosceptic government coming to power next time, wouldn't the answer be an alliance between UKIP and the Conservatives saying, right, you can stand in those seats, we will stand in these seats? Otherwise, you're going to split the right vote and you'll get a very European-friendly Labour-Liberal government in.
Certainly not, because I think that there's going to be a change. I think there's a very vast change coming. There's always a tipping point. You can look at the Scottish nationalists. They came from nowhere. And now the government of Scotland. UKIP are basically carving a new niche. We are not like the Conservatives. We're not some sort of Tory tribute band that some people are trying to make us out to be. We take votes from Labour, we take votes from the Conservatives and from the Liberals.
So there's going to be a UKIP government, David?
Well, I think in time, but not perhaps straight away. We don't know. Perhaps we will. Perhaps there won't be an immediate government of UKIP. I'd like to think there would be, but it's probably not the case first time around. But I don't think watching what's happened with the Liberals that forming an alliance with the Conservatives has been a particularly good thing to do. I would think that the Conservative Party is basically a dinosaur that's extremely badly wounded and it's on its way out. It doesn't represent the people it used to represent. It represents money and big business, and it's bought and paid for by them. They've ignored the ordinary membership of the party who've drifted off to UKIP. They don't care what they think.
Harry, the idea of an alliance between UKIP and Conservatives?
I don't think that's going to happen. But I do think that
wouldn't it make electoral sense then?
Well, I think clearly the Conservative Party is going to be contesting all the seats, and I think any scenario of Conservative Party not contesting all the seats is unrealistic. And I think probably it's unrealistic that UKIP won't contest the seats. But what I think the politicians don't control the voters, and it's not up to any political party to be able to instruct the people who would normally support them, how they would vote in all circumstances. And I think that it's quite likely that, as I mentioned in the Eastleigh by-election, it's quite legitimate for people voting in a by-election with to make a particular message for that by-election, and it's perfectly realistic, but perfectly legitimate that they would then vote differently in a general election. That's quite a intelligent, rational consideration for them to have. And what's going to be the position at the general election is that if David Cameron is made absolutely clear, if he's Prime Minister, then this referendum will happen. I think and the last time,
pull the other one,
the last time there was no. I think David was making a reference to the Lisbon Treaty, which was not in the Conservative manifesto last time.
Another excuse this time,
because the Lisbon Treaty, it was felt rightly or wrongly once it had been ratified that it wasn't realistic to pull out of it while also remaining in the European Union. Now, obviously, at the next election, it will be a very prominent pledge actually included in the election manifesto.
Then why not have it now, Harry?
Richard wants to go on.
I mean, so what Harry's kind of describing is really David Cameron's kind of big issue, isn't it? Is that, all this talk about, a referendum and kind of moving to the right and immigration, etc., is really playing to the UKIP agenda, and that's kind of where all the pressure is on David Cameron to kind of move to the right and stop this kind of leak of members, etc., to UKIP that's going on.
Is it not also true that there are lots of Lib Dem and Labour voters who are unhappy with the European Union and would like us to pull out?
I don't think there are lots of them. I mean, there will undoubtedly be some.
Lots of Labour voters that are. I mean, you'll have to look at Corby, where we got lots of votes.
That wasn't an election fought over the European Union, was it? But at the end of the day, David Cameron is moving to try and shore up, put UKIP positions within the party, because that's kind of where his problem is. But what he also knows at exactly the same time is he's not going to win a general election with a majority by moving to UKIP positions. That's just not going to be what he needs to do. He needs to stay in the centre-right, and that's how the Conservatives will win. And that's the cleft stick that he finds himself in. Every time he comes up with a new position that kind of moves him slightly more to the right, it makes it less likely that he will win a general election. And he's short-termism at the moment. He's thinking about the budget, he's thinking about the local elections come May. He's not even thinking about the general election in 2 years' time at the moment, because he's trying to shore up his own position. And that's the pressure he's under.
I think the terms left and right are meaningless generally. I think in particular they're meaningless in terms of the European Union, where we've got polling. I mean, you can be dismissive of polls if you like, but the opinion polling I've seen has been that a majority of people would like to leave the European Union, and that they include a very substantial number of Labour voters and Lib Dem voters. Absolutely. And the evidence from Eastleigh, in terms of people wanting to make that point, wanting to make that protest, was of lots of Labour and Lib Dem supporters who might vote for that party in a general election, making a protest. As David was saying, lots of them, as well as lots of Conservatives, making a protest by switching to UKIP. Now, I think the reasons why people would want to leave the European Union, in terms of wanting our self-determination, our democracy, would apply quite naturally to people of these parties. Lots of the things that in practice the European Union do in terms of bureaucracy, wasting money, are things that people from all across the spectrum would feel angry about. And so I think to say that this is only appealing to right-wingers for David Cameron to say we should have a choice on our EU membership is to misunderstand the views of the people.
Sorry, David, are you finding that you're appealing across the board, or is it mostly right-wingers?
Across the board. I mean, I find we're getting enormous support in council estates. People are fed up of being ignored by the Labour Party. The Labour Party are no longer interested in people in council estates. They give the houses to whoever just arrives. People who have perhaps been settled immigrants for 20, 30, 40 years are as angry as the indigenous population about not being able to find homes for their kids because more and more people are coming over. Now, if they can see that, we have a lot of ethnic minorities standing for us, and we are not a right-wing party. This is an absolute nonsense. We are a libertarian party, and very much we do not want. If you want an authoritarian party, you can't get anything more authoritarian than Liberal Democrats, who will tell you to eat your 5 greens a day and all that sort of nonsense. And the Tory party and the Labour Party are very much the same. They will all follow this health and safety agenda and all the rest. Everybody's sick to death of it. So they want something different, and the only party that offers something different is UKIP, and we offer a national government and not a class-based government as we've had in the past.
People do worry that you have certain policies, that immigration comprehensively thought through, but they do think, what about other policies?
Well, we have a full range of exciting policies. A lot of people are very excited about, especially our defence policy and also our education policy. I mean, the Conservatives will use everything except the word grammar schools, which is what we want. We want kids to get a good education. We're not interested in this class nonsense. I see Mr. Clegg is sending his children to some sort of Roman Catholic school because he doesn't think the local schools...
State school.
Well, yes, like Tony Blair, yes, but it's a very selective sort of a state school. It's a very posh sort of a state school.
So what, you'd have grammar schools back, would you?
You certainly would have grammar schools back. We'd have technical schools for those who are gifted in different ways, and mechanical and other sort of ways. And we'd have remedial schools to help others who are not doing so well to catch up. And this was the problem with the old education system. It didn't have that, but that's what we want. We want to make sure that the best get the best education, and we also want to go back to grants, less universities, but better quality.
We also have May elections coming up, the local elections. What would be a good result for David Cameron, and what would be a bad result, Harry?
I think that it's these are the county council elections where the Conservatives got a clean sweep last time round, and so they're going to make heavy losses. We haven't really talked much about an outfit called the Labour Party, and
that's partially because we don't have a Labour Party present here.
Why bother? There doesn't seem much point.
But there was it was an interesting point of how badly the Labour Party did in Eastleigh. They'd actually done pretty badly there at the general election, where their vote had gone down very sharply on the previous general election compared to how they've gone down further there than it had in the country generally. So they started from a very low base, and they scarcely increased their share of the vote at all. They were still
to be fair to the Labour Party, and as there's nobody here from the Labour Party to defend them, they have done quite well in previous by-elections.
Well, I think you're going to find a bit of a shock come the election, because so much support in the north of England is coming to UKIP. They've been let down by the Labour Party. They're not happy about it. They're not going to vote Tory, so they've got only one choice, and that's UKIP. And at the moment, I've been dealing a lot with it, our Scottish vote, or our Scottish support, is rapidly increasing, especially after Eastleigh, and there's a huge vacuum there since the Conservative Party imploded to some sort of singularity, which we can fill. And I think you're going to see some shocks in Scotland, and people who used to vote Liberal or Labour in Scotland or Conservative will start voting UKIP, and in the north of England, where both parties, Labour and Conservative, have let people down, the people in the north of England are going to vote for UKIP. Okay,
so Harry, what will David Cameron want from these May elections?
Well, I think the pressure will be on the Labour Party to get some big gains. I mean, they're almost inevitably going to make gains on where the seats were contested last time. But I think that obviously, if people extrapolate the number of gains or losses would be if the opinion polls reflected, then that will mean a pretty huge losses for the Conservatives, and so that, but I think that will be factored in. That's what will be expected. So I think that there'll be bad losses for the Conservatives. Whether that will particularly increase pressure on David Cameron or change people's prediction of the general election, I'm not so sure about.
I think it depends where those seats go. I mean, I think everyone kind of accepts the Tories are going to get a kicking in the May elections. They've got twice as many seats as the Liberals and Lib Dems and Labour combined to lose. So they will undoubtedly do badly. The issue is, where do they lose those seats to? So if Labour does particularly well, and where the elections are is not Labour territory, then that will say one thing. I think what's probably much more worrying for David Cameron is not so much that he will do badly, but that UKIP will do very well.
Yes.
Because most of the seats that are kind of up are prime UKIP territory. You would expect UKIP, given kind of where they've done in Eastleigh, to do very, very well in there. And if UKIP does well in those May local elections, the pressure on David Cameron will be enormous.
Well, now that people see that voting UKIP counts and you have a very good chance of winning, these elections are crucial. And UKIP, for the first time, and this is something that's going to be a shock to the Conservatives and the Labour Party and the Liberals, we'll be putting up as much as possible a full slate. And the interesting thing, and something that should worry the Conservatives, usually if you get councillors in seats, you get parliamentary seats. So we've got that coming up. Plus, of course, the European elections, where we hope to sweep the board. The Conservatives have got a lot to worry about.
The whole country.
Well, maybe not the whole country, but let's put it this way. I think if anybody who is not keen on the European Union, the only vote is UKIP, because you might as well forget Cameron. Cameron will not be giving you a vote on it before the election, and if he gives you a vote after the election, I'll give anybody a bottle of champagne.
You're tuned to the Voice of Russia. I'm Hywel Davies, and today's debate is on David Cameron and his future as Conservative leader after last week's Eastleigh by-election. I'm joined by Harry Phipps of the Conservative Home website, David Coburn, London Regional Chairman of UKIP, and by Richard Morris, a Lib Dem blogger for the New Statesman. Is UKIP aiming for specific geographical areas to concentrate its... I mean, it has only limited funds, obviously.
Well, oddly enough, we're getting lots of money coming in after Eastleigh. It's amazing how much money coming in. There are areas we do particularly well. The east of England, the East Anglia, we do extremely well. We've got a very good mayor there called Lisa Duffy, who's doing great things. So we're doing terribly well there. We do well in the southwest. We do well in the southeast. I think we're going to do very, very well all over. But we are concentrating a lot in the north, because we think that the north is going to come to us.
Harry, is that sort of slightly encouraging in that they might take votes from Labour as well, UKIP?
I think they will, and I think it will be interesting to see if UKIP gains some councillors. Will they be gaining them from Labour in sort of places like Derbyshire, Nottinghamshire? Will they be gaining them from the Conservatives in places like Surrey? Will they be getting them from the Lib Dems in places like Cornwall? Of course, goes back to this point that lots of Lib Dem voters, sort of Cornish fishermen, whoever else, might well be strong Eurosceptics.
The Conservative Party destroyed the fishing industry thanks to Mr. Heath and Geoffrey Rippon.
But this is the problem you'll face in May, Harry, is that, you sort of say, will they take them from Labour, will they take them from the Lib Dems? There's only 400 Labour seats. There's only actually 124 Lib Dem seats.
Certainly there are going to be heavy Conservative losses. I think it's just what the pattern is in terms of those results. So there will certainly be very interesting results. But I do think that the potential in a general election for people to switch their votes is very significant. I think the Conservatives who have got the right policy now, not just in terms of chasing UKIP votes, but the right policy in terms of lots of other supporters from other parties who want to have the referendum on the European Union, and know that the only prospect of that is if the Conservatives win the election, and clearly it's not something that the Labour are going to commit to, and clearly it's either going to be a Labour government, Labour-led government, or a Conservative-led government.
If David Cameron does badly in the May elections, the European elections, will he be tempted to take radical measures in economic policy, for example, perhaps even ditching George Osborne?
Certainly the area where I've got greatest concern in terms of the government's policy is that they haven't gone far enough in terms of reducing spending. I mean, it's the overall spending, it's marginal, whether it's fallen at all. And so I do think that they need to look at further savings. I don't think necessarily that there would be great cause for despair about how painful they would be. I think there are lots of boring areas of things like quangos, for example, where further savings could be achieved and more work could be done in that area. And I think that's something where there's obviously some discussion with the Lib Dems. But I think that there's, if the Lib Dems want, for example, to do more in terms of tax cuts for the low paid, which I would also like to see, then I think that the Lib Dems will have to agree to some tougher measures in terms of spending cuts if we're going to get tax down, which is the best way of getting economic growth.
Richard?
It's undoubtedly true that Lib Dems would like to see more people taken out of tax altogether. That's it's a stated policy of the party, and that's kind of what we're driving to. I mean, we would argue with our Conservative colleagues in sort of how that should be done. We've said the poorest have been hit and have now kind of paid enough, and we should be looking at other areas. So something like Trident would be an obvious area. I have no idea why we're recommissioning that at the moment. So, I mean, there will obviously be a debate. I mean, it's interesting that sort of Harry says sort of come, post-May, that's kind of where it is. I think the economic argument will be held much more quickly. It will be held in 2 weeks' time in the budget. If we have a sort of another debacle of a budget, then George Osborne's position will probably become untenable fairly quickly. And he's expected to pull all sorts of rabbits out of hats in 2 weeks' time to promote the growth agenda, which we all do want to see. But I'm not convinced there are any rabbits to be pulled.
I think people care whether it's George Osborne or not as the Chancellor. I'm perfectly happy to have George Osborne. What I want is the Chancellor delivering spending cuts and tax cuts and simpler taxes and less bureaucracy. And that's where there's been some achievement in that, but it's been mixed, and it's been mixed by other tax increases and more bureaucracy. And I don't think there's been a clear sense of achievement in that area. And that's where I think that the government need to get stuck in. Well,
they've cut all the wrong. You know fine well, Harry, you're a councillor. You know fine well they've cut all the wrong things. They've been cutting hospitals. They've been cutting all that sort of thing, but they're not cutting the fat.
Very sorry, but that's all we've got time for. So I'd like to thank Harry Phipps from the Conservative Home website, David Coburn, London Regional Chairman for UKIP, and Richard Morris, a Lib Dem blogger for the New Statesman. Thank you all very much. We just run out of time, I'm afraid.
Thank you.
Thank you.